Hi everyone, welcome to the video on rectangles. So please make sure that you've watched the first video on parallelograms because we're going to assume for this video that you understand parallelograms and their properties. So a rectangle actually is a special type of parallelogram that comes from, depending on what textbook you look at, the last property of parallelograms that is usually introduced, which is a rectangle is a special type of parallelogram where we have four right angles. And the theorem is if a parallelogram has one right angle, then it has four right angles. Well, why is that the case? Well, we have not been given labels for our vertices here, so I'm going to put them in. We'll call this A, B, C, D. So we're going to say for our given, we're going to say that A, B, C, D is a parallelogram, and that angle A is a right angle. So in order to prove this, what we have to do is we have to show that we actually have, so we're going to write a prove statement, that angle B, angle C, and angle D are all right angles. So the way to do this, we're going to start with some of our basic parallelogram properties, and I'm going to use two of them. So I'm going to say first that we have angle A is congruent to angle C. And we know that because if parallelogram, opposite angles congruent. And I'm going to say that angle A is supplementary to angle D. And again, we know that's if P gram, then we have same side interior angles supplementary. Okay. So with those two statements, I can say that angle, and actually I'm going to add a statement to my first line here. You just select and move my reason over. And I'm going to say that's also true of angle B. Angle B is congruent to angle D for the same reason. Okay, so from those two statements, I can say this. Angle A is congruent to angle C, so that must mean, I'm going to write it this way, angle C is a right angle. Why? All right angles, use the right angle symbol, congruent. So that means, again, if we already know that A is congruent to C, and A is a right angle, well, if it's the same as C, then C must be a right angle also. Okay, so we got two of them. So I'm just going to check off angle C. We know that angle B and D are congruent. So all I need to do is show that one of them is a right angle, and then that will make the other one a right angle as well. And I can do that this way. I'm going to say that angle B is going to be a right angle. And the reason for that is, actually I have to start with D. D is going to be the easier one because of the statement I already made. D is a right angle because if it's supplementary to A, if supplementary to a right angle, then it's also a right angle. Why? Because if I have 90 degrees in angle A and I need to get to 180, right? That's what supplementary means. Then D has to have the rest of the 180. Well, what's left after you put 90? 90. Okay? So I got D. Angle B is a right angle. All right angles congruent. And there's your final angle. So if you have a parallelogram with one right angle, you have four right angles. You'll see other proofs of this. There are some longer ones using different reasons than what I've used. There's some using right triangles. Mine goes more based on the logic, using the properties of parallelograms and what we know about right angles. So you might not see the reason if supplementary to right angle, then right angle. Most proofs would have that in a little bit longer sentence that would go through the measurements, the 180, the 90, probably use angle addition, so it would take you quite a few more steps. All right, the last specific property of a parallelogram is that is a rectangle, the diagonals are congruent. So I'm going to highlight two triangles because that's how we're going to prove this. This is actually pretty easy to prove. This is going to be short. We'll say A, B, C, D again. So our given is A, B, C, D is rectangle. And then after that, we are to prove that DB is congruent to AC. Okay, so our givens, A, B, C, D is a rectangle. So that would mean our first statement should be that angles A, B, C, and D are right angle. And again, that's your definition of rectangle. You can say if rectangle, then 4 right angles if you like, but that's a lot of writing to me. So that's our first step of the proof. Angle D is congruent to angle C. All right angles are congruent. Okay, and I'm just going to, since I can't mark the angles again, I'm just going to trace over them so we can see that we've got that. I'm going to say that A, it's a weird looking A, AD is congruent to BC, because if parallelogram, we have opposite sides congruent. So we're using a property of parallelograms because a rectangle is a special type of parallelogram. And then we're going to say DC is congruent to itself because we have reflexive. Something is always equal to itself, correct? So then we're going to say that we have triangle ADC is congruent to triangle BCD by side angle side. And then we're going to say that what we want, DB is congruent to AC by CPCTC. I'm not going to mark it because that just gets a little confusing with the fact they intersect. But we have the diagonals congruent there. And again, this is something that only happens in rectangles because now this isn't an official property, but it's just something you should know. A rectangle, you can also say that the same side interior angles are supplementary because they are both right angles in this case. And so because of that, that's how you get the diagonals congruent in a rectangle, but you don't have that in a parallelogram because the angles, remember how the parallelogram is a little crooked, right? So one angle is usually acute and the other obtuse. This is the only case where you have them both the same, and there's the congruent triangles, right? Because when we did that proof on the last one using the congruent triangles, we had to use some different things to kind of go around in a weird arrangement because the diagonals weren't congruent. We had to use parts of the angles of the shape and the parallel lines instead of here how we use the right angles. So that's just another difference. But again, the important things to remember for rectangles, they are parallelograms, so they share all the same properties, and they have, in addition, so they have the 4 right angles, and the diagonals are congruent. All right, thanks for watching the rectangle video. We have one more on rhombi and squares.